There's a billionaire, and if you don't know his name, you certainly know his business background. Les Wexner will be grilled tomorrow. This is part of what has become a bipartisan rebuke to Donald Trump over and over on the Epstein files. He said no new files. Congress made him release them. That's the story we've been following. He said, let it go. It's an old story. Congress said, no, there's more to do. And so it stays in the news because of these actual investigative developments. Now, Wexner had a long and very big kind of business relationship with Epstein. The question is what kind of business? But tens of millions of dollars were exchanged. This deposition will occur in Ohio. That's part of an accommodation of the witness, who is 88 years old. Now, when I mention business, what these two men did in business is part of what's under investigation. So on the one hand, we could tell you that Wexner was a successful businessman, a billionaire, and that he was also a benefactor of Epstein, that he helped him financially. And maybe that's all there was to it. We want to be careful and follow the facts. But lawmakers, investigators, and independent journalists have raised the question of just why so much of Wexner's money ended up in Epstein's pockets. At one point, Epstein was managing Wexner's finances. Then they did sever ties. And that was in 2007 as more heat came on Epstein. What we're learning from the files, though, is that Wexner is in there over 1,000 times. Emails, lawsuits that seem to involve potentially both of them. And the DOJ has even modified some of the redactions to the 2019 FBI file that showed they were looking at whether Wexner had exposure related to the crimes they were investigating Epstein for. Now, we want you to understand what Wexner has said, and this is prior to even the new files release. He maintains that they had a kind of professional relationship and that ultimately he became disenchanted with what he viewed as Epstein's failures or misconduct with regard to finances. Now, Wexner will be only the second person to speak before Congress since the files were released. You can see a lot of the pressure on many of these individuals we've been tracking, while Trump Commerce Secretary Lutnick, caught lying to minimize his visit to Epstein Island, remains in the cabinet. So there is a kind of a clash between accountability for some and not others. Congress has some efforts to investigate, and we've seen that in a, at times, bipartisan way, while there's also been an effort to distract or look at certain individuals. For example, the calls to investigate powerful men, some of whom might be implicated in this, are a long ways from going after Hillary Clinton. Here's what she's saying.
What we're seeing, I think it's fair to say, is a continuing cover-up by the Trump administration. There's something about this administration's attitude toward this, which I think really leads us to conclude they have something to hide. They are slow-walking it. They are redacting the names of men who are in it. They are stonewalling legitimate requests from members of Congress. That has nothing to do with us. Something is going on. They know it. I know it.
That's Hillary Clinton, who, of course, as I mentioned, has been targeted by some of the Republicans, although when you go looking for rich, powerful men who may have gotten away with something, she wouldn't really be on the list, not based on the files or the information we have. Now, Republican Thomas Massie, who has been really seen as a good faith bipartisan collaborator here, working with Democrats to get to the bottom of this, says on any given day, I need one or two of my own co-conspirators to get something done. Once we get past Republican primaries, I think you're going to see defections. That's his reference to the fact that Trump still has, of course, more sway in primary season, but there is a lot more that they can do if they get the votes. Now, what's happening out there? What has happened in places where we've seen that the files show prosecutors and investigators might have been pressured out of doing a full investigation or fallen down on the job, and the things we've shown you on our timeline? Well, this is interesting. The state of New Mexico now has a new probe into Epstein's ranch there. Survivors have said they were abused. That ranch has been known for a long time. What we're seeing is how information, investigation, and public pressure can lead to investigations that otherwise were not going to happen. Colombia has now sanctioned two individuals that they think helped Epstein's girlfriend gain admission there, again, through how his largesse may have distorted things far away from his own accused sex crimes, but just the sort of way he wielded influence. Two prominent business people facing consequences over their ties to Epstein. We reported, for example, on the Wasserman issue, his ties to Maxwell, not to any alleged crimes per se, have led to him having to sell off his entire talent agency. Others across the spectrum facing subpoenas or these pressure points we've shown you. The New York Times asked, why didn't anyone say something? And that what we're learning, again, from this unusual transparency effort shows how a group can collude with dark secrets if they serve their interests. The price of admission to Epstein's world was, the Times says, silence. And so when you look at this entire issue, it has really gone topsy-turvy. It started as something that was so under-investigated with so little accountability that became part of the scandal. And the question over years, would he really get away with it forever? And then, of course, he was ultimately, Mr. Epstein was indicted. He died in prison, awaiting trial. Maxwell later indicted and convicted. So you had some baseline accountability, though very delayed. And the idea was, well, leave it there. And Donald Trump repeatedly said, leave it there. It's old news. Nothing more to see here. But he was overruled by some of his own supporters who, for whatever their reasons, wanted to get to the bottom of this and agitated, put pressure on Congress, which then, late but finally, came up with this bipartisan effort to get the files out. And one of the questions, remember, it's very easy to stand in judgment and look at things in hindsight, what they call, of course, Monday morning quarterbacking. But what you see now is that there was important information in the files. Doesn't mean it's going to lead to a bunch of indictments or convictions. We have a process that we have to follow in this country under the rule of law, even if some wish it otherwise. But what I showed you in the accountability, that having learned information about some of these individuals, other people in the public marketplace of accountability said, no, I don't want to be in business with them. Or no, that's not okay. Or no, short of indictment, which is a government process, the public said, we are reacting. And that's in the early days. As I've told you, we and other outlets have been going through these files. It takes time to do it right. There are millions of revelations. We are seeing a move for accountability. And this isn't a screenplay. This isn't a movie. If it were a movie, you'd say it's a little rich that there's accountability everywhere but in the White House of the president, who claimed in his most recent election that he wanted to get to the bottom of this, and finding that the bottom or the involvement of this includes people in his own cabinet, he won't lift a finger to even publicly say they shouldn't have consorted with Epstein, let alone fire them, which is a far, far lower level than whether you're ever going to have the wider calls for accountability as mentioned. So there is something happening, and the information is having real-world consequences. It's just everywhere but in Trump's administration.
The names of folks that could be co-conspirators, that helped fund Jeffrey Epstein, that could have actually been involved in the terror and rape, as we know, abuse of women and children. Some of those names continue to be redacted and protected.
Lawmakers speaking out as they prepare to put one of Epstein's, at least associates, clients, under oath. I'm joined by Nancy Erica Smith, a civil rights attorney who's represented numerous victims of sexual harassment and assault. Welcome back. When you look at this and the Congress going forward, this is the continued work that Trump didn't want for his own reasons, but he was very public in saying that. And this sort of reflects a late effort to get more information, whatever the relationship may be with Wexner. Your thoughts on this work, however tardy?
I think that Thomas Massie is a hero here, and he's paying for it. He's described the threats he's receiving. He calls this the Epstein administration, which certainly seems true. Not only has Representative Raskin told us that Trump was mentioned, there were 1 million hits in the 3.5 million documents that have been released. But the DOJ has violated the Epstein Transparency Act, so who knows what's in the other 2.5 million documents, and the redactions have not been cleaned out. So it just seems that Epstein ran an international ring of trafficking young girls, information, influence, and connections with the highest levels. And we see indictments in other countries, and a prince is stripped of his princedom or whatever. So why aren't we moving forward, and why is it so difficult to get Congress to act? Well, thank goodness for Thomas Massie, but we don't have a Department of Justice. We can't even call it a Department of Justice anymore. When Todd Blanche Trump's former lawyer was asked, will you investigate the tips that have not been followed up on in the files? He said, no, there's going to be no investigations because they're unfounded. Well, how do you know they're unfounded if you don't investigate them? It's absurd. And meanwhile, we see this pampering Ghislaine Maxwell after Todd Blanche meets with her. And
let's dig into this new part with Wexner, because one question is, did Epstein just get away because he was rich and powerful, could hire the best lawyers? As you know, there are individuals who've hired pricey lawyers and not gotten away with as much as Jeffrey Epstein. So another investigative question, I want to be very precise about this, not proven. Pam Bondi said they didn't see any leads to go after potential blackmail, which could be of powerful people or even people inside the government. And now we have the files, and they might paint a different picture, and Congress is going to make its own judgment. So I want to read from, again, what we're only learning because it's come out without presupposing the whole story. But illicit trysts is how the New York Times headlined their coverage of this part of the files, and what they call, quote, leverage with the wealthy, quoting what we now have learned, where you have Epstein telling Wexner, who's going under oath tomorrow, you and I had gang stuff for over 15 years. I owe a great debt to you, as frankly you owe to me. And Epstein says he has no intention of divulging any confidence of ours. I'm curious how you, as someone who's dealt in these fields, interpret that. Would investigators want to look at that as just a statement, hey, we're good, we're secrets are safe? Or sometimes people say those things as a veiled threat. Is that worth looking into when he's under oath tomorrow?
I definitely think that is a veiled threat, not so veiled threat, actually, of blackmail.